Welcome back here on Hack City. I'm Joe DeLeone, and we are here to preview week 4 of college football action. We have a fantastic slate of games coming up this weekend. Not a ton of ranked on ranked matchups, but nonetheless, a lot of fun games that we're going to get to watch this weekend. We are going to be talking about specifically Clemson versus Wake Forest, Florida playing Tennessee. That's the big one, of course. Oregon, Washington State, Arkansas, Texas A&M, and then lastly, USC, Oregon State. If you're tuning in either live, make sure you hit that like button, drop a comment, or if you're tuning in on the replay, hit that like button as well as dropping a comment below on your thoughts on this upcoming week, the slate of games that we are going to be discussing on this show. So before we get to the games, I wanted to talk about the Herm Edwards situation at Arizona State because I didn't have time to react to it this week, and I figured starting off the top of the show would be a perfect opportunity to do so. So Herm Edwards, who was at Arizona State, had dealt with some recruiting violations, some staff turnover early on in his tenure. Arizona State was a decent program. They were on the rise. Jaden Daniels looked really good, and then they dealt with all that turmoil, and then it rapidly declined. They lost to Eastern Michigan last week. He was fired. There is speculation that he might have been fired on the field. I don't know if you've seen that clip or not, and I encourage you to go look for that clip. It's floating around on Twitter. That adds to the mess that has been the Herm Edwards story at Arizona State. Him getting fired is not the surprise. The timing of it sucks, and if you lose to a group of 5 school, a mediocre group of 5 school as well, because Eastern Michigan's nothing special, you deserve to be fired, especially after all of the allegations and the problems that have happened at Arizona State. The big thing with a program like Arizona State is that they're capable of being not one of the best, but one of the better Pac-12 teams. So a little bit over 500. We're talking 8 wins, 9 wins is a really good season for Arizona State. That's what the ceiling is. It has always been a program that is a stepping stone for other coaches to maybe bounce off of and get better jobs. But we've seen competitive Arizona State teams. And the results that were put on the field recently were not good enough for him to stick around. The speculation is already churning on who might be a likely candidate to fill this job. And the 3 that I've seen at the top, I think, make the most sense. 2 of them are for guys that are currently sitting in broadcast chairs, that being Tom Herman, who was previously at Texas and Houston, and the other being Dan Mullen, who was at Florida, most recently fired from Florida. And before he was at Florida, he was at Mississippi State. I like both of these guys because they're both in the broadcast booth for that intention of staying fresh, staying around the game, staying in everybody's eyesight so that they're brought up in these discussions like we're doing right now. They're trying to get back into it. They're not going to get back into it and be offered a big-time SEC job or a big-time Big Ten job. It's just not going to happen. For them to get back where they were aspiring to reach, which is for Dan Mullen, an equivalent to Florida, for Tom Herman, an equivalent to Texas, for them to get back there, they need to take over a program that if you show results and you're a winning team, you're going to get reoffered those opportunities. It's going to happen. So you come in Arizona State, you recruit a region that is actually growing with quality recruits. A lot of people don't realize this, but a ton of people from California are moving to Arizona. You're and other states as well. It, for whatever reason, is one of those states where a lot of people are moving. It's hot as balls. I have no idea why anyone in their right mind would want to move to Arizona. But nonetheless, there are more and more recruits that are coming out of Arizona. Spencer Rattler being a perfect example, who was a 5-star recruit. Now, I've said Rattler sucks, but that is a separate story. Arizona, as you're pointing out here, Colin, is fantastic for recruiting. It's very, very underrated. It's probably somewhere in the back end of the top 10, maybe a little bit outside the top 10 for quality of recruits. If you could step into this job and you can out-recruit Arizona, you can win games, and then you can use that to leapfrog to another opportunity. So either of those guys, I think, make the most sense. If you're a program like Arizona, it's going to be tough to try and coax one of those lower level guys like like a Lance Leopold who's at Kansas. Like, he's not going to leave Kansas. Jamie Chadwell from Coastal Carolina, not going to leave to go to Arizona State when he's likely hoping for an even bigger opportunity if he's going to leave. There is like an insane amount of beeping that is happening right outside of my door. Sorry, that is just insanely distracting. The last name, though, that I think is worth acknowledging here is Matt Rule. Matt Rule is going to get fired. Matt Rule is not going to be the Panthers head coach for very long. We all know this. He has failed. He is not going to stick around with the Carolina Panthers. And he has produced and brought up lesser brands like Temple and like Baylor. Like, Baylor's not a big brand in the Big 12. He has produced results at these programs. And Matt Rule and his agent are going to try to position him in a way to get a head coaching gig at the college level as quickly as possible. I don't know how I feel about... I got Donato's question about long snappers. You distracted the hell out of me, Donato. I don't know how I feel about Matt Rule going into the broadcast booth. I don't think that he's one of those guys. I think he's somebody that is going to be looking for an opportunity to immediately step in and take over a program right away. And he's going to get fired soon. He is not going to finish this season. He is the most likely, and I think everyone can agree, the most likely NFL coach to be fired early. So that's a really fun name to consider for that Arizona State job. Though one other thing that I want to talk about before I get to these games is that the Nebraska coaching candidates are already starting to get talked about, which the names that have been discussed have been pretty ridiculous. The three that I've seen most commonly brought up for Nebraska are Urban Meyer. You see a lot of Urban Meyer. For some reason, Deion Sanders has been brought up as a candidate for Nebraska, and then Lance Leopold, who's at Kansas. For those three guys, there's a lot of reasons why they're not going to take that job. Urban Meyer, from people I've talked to that know Urban, after that Jacksonville situation, if he is going to head somewhere else, he's not going to go to Nebraska. He's going to want to go to a more premier brand, a bigger brand. But on top of that, like, he's in his late 60s. Like, why would he want to go spend the remainder of his career at Nebraska? He's going to want to go somewhere that he wants to finish his coaching career. Just from people I talked to, I asked somebody who knew him last cycle for when the Notre Dame gig opened up, and he had a background of being an assistant coach at Notre Dame, and I was told that he has no intention of wanting to coach in the Midwest. I would be shocked if Urban Meyer took this Nebraska job. Deion Sanders also is not leaving Jackson State, I think, unless it's Florida State that opens up or a premier SEC job. You can tell, and for those that follow HBCU football and FCS football, know that Deion gives up a lot to have an impact on this program. I believe he forgoes either all of his salary or most of his salary to pay for a lot of things for this program. Most recently, I think Deion even gave up money in his salary for stadium renovations. So he's giving up a lot to helping grow an HBCU program. He's not going to leave Nebraska or leave Jackson State with all that on the line to go to Nebraska. It's either going to be Florida State where he played, or it's going to be a big premier SEC job. This Nebraska job is not appealing for a lot of big candidates. The last one that I think is unlikely, but is still possible, is Lance Leopold, who is currently at Kansas. They're already producing results. They're 3-0. They're probably going to be a bowl team. They have shown us that they are good enough to be a bowl team this year. He previously was really good at Wisconsin Whitewater. Then after that, he was at Buffalo, and they were really freaking good underneath him. And now he is already turning around the Kansas program very quickly. The thing that doesn't make any sense to me is why, if you're Lance Leopold, if you're already in a Power Five conference, would you jump from Kansas to Nebraska, which has been a struggling program and a brand that has been very hard to recruit to? Again, I think if Lance Leopold is going to jump ship, he's going to do it to go to a much bigger brand like a lot of these guys. I don't think a lot of people realize the damage that has been done over the past few years for the brand and the recognition of Nebraska. You're trying to recruit 20-year-olds to come play for your program. Nebraska hasn't not only not been relevant, but they haven't been competitive in a long time. Most of these recruits don't know of a competitive Nebraska team. They don't know of the national championships that they won. There's also not a lot of kids that come out of Nebraska that are going to have the ties to the program that are going to want to go and play at Nebraska. It's going to take a more of a mid-tier name instead of those three options that have been thrown out there. All right, let's get into this slate of games that we have for week 4. First being Clemson versus Wake Forest. So my first thought on this game, first thing that I wrote down when I was doing my notes ahead of time, Clemson still hasn't played anybody. This is their first real test. Clemson is not in a situation where we should just automatically assume they're ranked highly, they're going to come out and they're going to smack Wake Forest. They're still going through a lot of the growing pains and headaches that they've been dealing with since Trevor Lawrence left. They have not fully recovered, and we're still seeing that so far this season. Now, they look like they're making progress and they're taking steps forward. They now have to face a strong Wake Forest program that has their starting quarterback back in Sam Hartman. I understand that Wake Forest played a very tight game against Liberty, and Liberty sucks this year. Liberty is not good this season for us to be considering that to be a potential realistic upset. They don't have Malik Willis. They don't have anybody on that roster. That is a mishap on Wake Forest's part to barely win that game. But where I give credit to this team, to this Wake Forest team, is that Sam Hartman is coming back from a serious medical issue. He is coming back from a serious hardship to have to miss part of training camp. I believe it was 1 game or 2 games so far. It's going to take time for him to get back into the rhythm that we saw he was capable of playing at last season. There's a lot of good athletes on this team. I love A.T. Perry as a draft prospect, who's one of their star receivers, which actually is their star receiver. They, if they get into a rhythm, are going to be a really tough team to beat in the ACC. And I think that right now, they are still a top 4 team in the ACC. So if Sam Hartman, on that note, if Sam Hartman in this game bounces back after a weak performance against Liberty, gets back more into stride, doesn't turn the ball over the way that he did against Liberty, that is going to keep them in this ballgame. That is going to put them in a position to win. However, I still lean Clemson. Clemson is going to win this football game. And the reason why I feel that Clemson is starting to recover is that they looked crappy against Georgia Tech, who we know is not a very good team. But they have slowly taken steps forward in progression. Their offense is starting to look better and better. Understandably, they've only beaten Furman and LA Tech since they played Georgia Tech. But as this team plays more football games, their defense gets more comfortable. They're going to be playing at that top 10 caliber. I don't see this being their first loss. It is going to come later on in the season, whether that is against NC State, who also looks weak, whether it is against Miami. Their first loss is not going to happen this week. They're not going to lose to Wake Forest. I still have faith in DJ Uiagalelei. We have to consider, and I know people joke that the offense still looks the same despite the turnover at offensive coordinator. It is a difficult process to transition from one offensive coordinator to another if you're a starting quarterback. It takes time to learn that offense and get comfortable. And while it might not be that different from last season, it's still a process. So for me, Clemson is going to win this football game. This is going to be one of those games where it's going to set off a trajectory for them to keep improving and improving. Their schedule, just looking at it, is pretty weak after they play NC State. I still think that NC State is one of the most overrated teams in the country. For them to be ranked 12 is ridiculous. I'm likely, when we talk about that game next week, am going to be in favor of Clemson again. But they have a very weak stretch of games until they play Miami and then South Carolina. And as we saw, South Carolina is a pretty soft team. The next big game in week 4 is the one that everyone's going to be talking about, but is not as competitive of a matchup as I think people really anticipate. Tennessee versus Florida. A lot on the line for both of these teams. Tennessee, their toughest battle, they went down to the wire against Pitt, who is a struggling program right now. Not struggling. They're not as good as they were last year. They're not SEC caliber. So we don't fully know how good Tennessee is just yet. I'm unwilling to base the quality of Tennessee off of that Pitt game, because I still don't think Pitt is a very good team. They do, however, have in their back pocket the ability to say that they came in and won a game in overtime, and they know and they can trust themselves. They have the confidence in themselves that they can win games in overtime. But if you compare these two rosters front to back, Tennessee significantly is a more talented roster across the board. I was way too high on Florida after that win that they had against Utah. I've come back down to reality. That Florida roster needs a lot of work. I like Osiris Torrance, ETN. Their running back is a quality player, but there is a lot of holes across that roster. That team right now is Anthony Richardson. It goes as far as Anthony Richardson plays. And as we saw when they played against Kentucky, when Anthony Richardson is struggling and he can't find other guys on his team to get the ball to and to rely on, and he has to do everything and is not getting just a little bit of help, he presses too hard, he tries to do too much, and then he makes really, really stupid, boneheaded mistakes. The biggest thing, that Kentucky loss doesn't necessarily worry me for this matchup because it's one bad game. But the way that they played against South Florida, who is not good this year, last week, that game was way, way too close for comfort. And for that reason, I am picking Tennessee to win this football game. As I said in the beginning, front to back, you line up these teams on a field and you evaluate the matchups. Tennessee has a far more well-rounded and progressed team than Florida. That shouldn't be surprising. Josh Heupel has already had a little bit of time, a whole full first season, to prepare his team, to recruit, to develop, to find the right guys that are going to help move the offense. And he's got his two guys that are looking really good so far this year in Hendon Hooker and, oh my God, I'm blanking on the receiver's name. Regardless, Tennessee has had more time to prepare and develop. It is the first season for Billy Napier. It is going to take some time before they actually get in that position where they'll be more competitive in these games. The whole media got way ahead of themselves after they beat Utah. We need to come back down to reality. This is going to be a likely loss for Florida. After that one, we've got an underrated game. This is one that I'm going to be monitoring. It's a little bit later in the day. Oregon versus Washington State. So Oregon smacks BYU this past weekend. And the stock on Oregon is very, very high. Very high. A lot of people have been begging the question is, how is Georgia really that good that they're able to make a quality Oregon team look like an FCS program? Is that the level of dominance that Georgia has? I think we have a glimpse of what Oregon can be. And I said this on the recap show that Oregon is one of the top 3 teams that is going to be competing for the Pac-12 championship. But they need to win this game first. This is a very, very shut up. The Bo Nix hype is not going to take off. No, Colin. This is a very important game for them to continue to prove themselves. Because that BYU team that they faced was pretty weak as we witnessed. Cam Ward is starting to step into stride. And this is a game that's at Washington State. I have hyped up Cam Ward so much coming into this season. I have talked about him immensely on the FCS football pod when he was at Incarnate Word previously. The guy has a Patrick Mahomes type arm. We saw one of those throws that he made last weekend against Colorado State where he fit the ball into a really tight window. He has all the talent to be the best, if not a top 2 quarterback in the Pac-12 by the end of the season. Him right next to Caleb Williams. He is that good of a player. He is that talented of a player and potentially could be a first-round pick if he continues to take steps forward. But what is dangerous for the Pac-12 is if Cam Ward continues to get comfortable. If Cam Ward is comfortable and he is feeling like himself like he did at Incarnate Word, you got to be afraid. And he's already showing glimpses of that. Now, the one thing that does worry me a little bit in this matchup is that I don't know how easily I can trust Oregon's defense in this game. BYU, and I know that they looked really good against BYU, was dealing with a lot of issues running the ball. They were struggling. And to Oregon's credit, they played really good run defense. But that's not how Washington State's going to beat them. Washington State is going to beat them through the air with Cam Ward by throwing the ball 40 times if they have to. They're going to use him as often as they can. How effectively they pressure Cam Ward, force him to make mistakes. If he turns the ball over, and he has had a propensity to do so in his time in Incarnate Word, that if he was trying too hard and he was pushing too much, he will be aggressive, almost like Patrick Mahomes will. And he will turn the ball over. He will throw interceptions. But I still, as much as I think that Cam Ward is important in this game, I lean Oregon. I think that Dan Lanning has figured out the identity of this team. The Bo Nix hype is still not there. They're going to win the game because they run the ball really well and control the clock and prevent Cam Ward from throwing 40 to 50 passes. That is what this game is going to come down to, and Oregon's going to win this football game. After that, Arkansas versus Texas A&M. I got to get right to the chase on this one. I still have no faith in Texas A&M. I have absolutely no faith that Texas A&M is a competitive, ranked worthy team. After their loss to App State and then the performance that we saw that they put out there against Miami. They looked very messy against Miami, particularly the way that Max Johnson played. I know that it's his first start of the season. I know that he is not a dynamic win because of quarterback. But if he plays the way that he did in this matchup against Arkansas, that is dealing with some injuries, they are not going to come anywhere close to winning this football game. While their run game and their pass defense has been explosive, Texas A&M, their pass defense was amazing in that Miami game. I know that they benefited from some crappy throws by Tyler Van Dyke and some drop balls from the Miami receivers. But I have a lot of faith in KJ Jefferson and in Arkansas's offensive line to clear rushing lanes, to dominate time of possession, to really grind out this game in a physical manner. And I have not seen the physicality up front from Texas A&M, I think, to compete with Arkansas's offensive line. The one thing that's always going to get brought up with Arkansas this week is the way that they played against Missouri State. That is a typical trap game. You are going up against a guy that very infamously left the program in Bobby Petrino. He is now the head coach of Missouri State. That is a very difficult circumstance. That is a circumstance where they probably came out flat, thinking that they were going to smack them, and they were able to very similar to the Cincinnati game where I talked about this a while ago. They came out like they were going to smack them, and then they were talented enough and good enough and physical enough to just work themselves back into the football game. I have a lot of faith in Arkansas this week. No faith in Texas A&M because of the way that they've played so far this season. Give me Arkansas in this one. KJ is going to have a great game. They're going to run the ball so freaking well. I love that Arkansas offensive line led by Ricky Stromberg. Should not be a shocking outcome here if Arkansas wins this. And the craziest thing with this, by the way, my final thought on this, I believe currently Arkansas is still the underdog by like 2 points in this game, which is stupid. It's ridiculous. Texas A&M beats Miami, a overranked ranked team, and suddenly they're getting favored in a battle against a much stronger and more aggressive Arkansas squad. Thank you for the hack shout out, Chad. Last game I want to talk about here. USC versus Oregon State. This game deserves to at least just be highlighted because USC has a very, very, very weak schedule. A very weak schedule. I think like one of their toughest games is Utah, who has a loss on their record, lost to a Florida team that is not as good as we thought that it was. USC, this is like one of their first real tests. They played Fresno State, and that was considered to be a test. That was what people were talking about, and they beat them pretty handedly. Oregon State has some nice players. Their quarterback, Chance Nolan, has been talked about as an underrated name in the Pac-12 for them at quarterback. And this Oregon State team overall is an underrated team. They are not going to match up at all with the receivers that USC has, with the run game that USC has, and then not to mention the fact that Caleb Williams is likely on a Heisman trajectory. If he finishes this season with a couple of losses at the max, maybe 1 or 2 losses, and keeps playing the way that he is, very strong chance that he wins the Heisman by the end of this year. It's very, very likely. What becomes a concern and what is continually being brought up, and why I think USC is not going to make the college football playoff, is their issues on the defensive side of the ball. They are giving up a lot of head-scratching plays, some of which we saw against Fresno State. They have played very weak competition, and they are not playing up to the level that they're going to need to play if they were to face off with Georgia as the 4 seed and Georgia being the 1 seed in the college football playoff. This is one of the first early tests for them. Can they step up to the occasion? Can they step up to the opportunity to prove that they are not a liability? And of course, Lincoln Riley only focuses on offense, as we saw at Oklahoma. The offense comes to play, the defense doesn't. And maybe that's going to be the approach every single game. Every tough game that they have to play, the approach is going to be, we're just going to outscore you. And if that is the strategy in this game, USC by far is going to outscore Oregon State pretty easily. All right, I got a comment from Chad. I wanted to get to this. The reason we hate Nebraska and South Dakota is because their fans are all asshats back in the 90s, and those same fans are completely delusional, thinking that next year is the next coming of the glory days. So that was kind of what I was talking about earlier. I don't know if you're on here, Chad. I was talking about the unlikelihood of them being able to get a big name coach to come take over. I think that a lot of these Nebraska fans don't realize that history has passed them by. It is way past them. It is not that same brand that it used to be. It does not have the same allure that it used to have. They're going to need to get a B level coach. That's what Scott Frost kind of was when they hired him. He was like a B plus. And they lucked out on being able to get him because he played there and he was coming from having a a really good record at UCF. So this is an interesting point here. You're pointing out that you think it's going to be Mike Entz, or you hear that it's going to be Mike Entz. I feel like if Entz is going to leave North Dakota State, wouldn't he leave for a better opportunity than Nebraska? I mean, it makes sense. It's like a step right into, one Midwestern state into another. But like if you're gonna make that jump, wouldn't you try to position North Dakota State to just move up to the FBS? Wait, I'm making a mistake, aren't I? Where's Matt Entz at? Oh, he's at North Dakota State. Am I crazy here? Whatever. Regardless, do we have any other comments here? So other comment from Colin. Am I crazy? I could have sworn Matt Entz is the North Dakota State coach. Confusing the hell out of me. Colin, your comment here. Other games I'll be watching this week: TCU, SMU, Kansas, Duke, Minnesota, Michigan State. Yeah, I said Mike Entz. Okay, we're getting really confused over here. It's hard to talk, read the chat, and then also Google who's the head coach of North Dakota State. So pardon me. Colin's talking about the other games that he's watching: Minnesota, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Washington, Stanford. Quick just run through on these. TCU SMU is going to be a snooze fest. Both those teams are a couple of years away. Kansas Duke is going to be fun. I'm going to be watching that game for sure. I'm putting that on in my second, put it on my laptop while I'm watching the main game on my main TV. Minnesota, Michigan State. Michigan State needs to bounce back from the loss that they had against Washington. Perfect opportunity to prove themselves against a well-coached Minnesota team. Wisconsin, Ohio State might be a bloodbath, but at the very same time, kind of like that Notre Dame game, it could be really low scoring, and Ohio State could just finish them out in the end because they have the athletes to do so. Washington, Stanford, Colin, is going to suck. That is going to be one of the worst games that you brought up here. Stanford's terrible. Stanford is not a good football program. They are a very, very bad football program. So that likely is going to be very, very lopsided. Try to see if Colin had any other comments earlier because I saw you were spamming this chat. Yeah, I don't. So to address this, Sean shows up when he feels like it. I'm tired of pressuring him to show up to do things. So it is what it is. Iowa, Rutgers. Actually, this isn't a bad game. I think I might have put some money on this game. I forget if I did or not. I think I took Rutgers. Iowa's terrible. I still stand by that. I think that Iowa's very overrated Big Ten team. Rutgers is on the rise, which is weird. Shiano's got this team moving, and he's got them moving in the right direction, which feels so weird to say, being from New Jersey and following, Rutgers for so many years, and like even at one point wanting to play at Rutgers, which would have been my downfall. But no, Spencer Petras, garbage. This is probably going to be like a 10-7 game, very likely. Just a random thought off the top of my head. South Dakota State beats Rutgers, though, right? Which is, kind of contrary to what I'm saying right now. I think, though, that Rutgers has a little bit of juice and they can win this game. Iowa does need a quarterback. And I said this a while ago that if you get like a mid-tier quarterback and you put them on Iowa, that's a ranked team. They have a really freaking good defense, but Spencer Petras has just been horrible, absolutely horrible this season, and they don't have anyone else to turn to. Who wants to go to a New Jersey school? Well, Princeton's a good school, but the rest of the New Jersey schools are horrible. There's not a single good football program, not a single good academic school. Rutgers is meh. Not a lot of positives there for any of the New York schools. Anybody that wants a fat sandwich? I'm surprised, Chad, that you know what that is, not being from New Jersey, which is kind of, funny to see that you're aware of what the fat sandwiches are. I've never had one, but I know that it is a very big tradition that they have there at Rutgers. All right, I think that's going to wrap us up on, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I think it's just Chad and Colin, and then we've got one ancillary person who's also tuning in. But we're going to be back later in the week. I think what's going to happen over the rest of the streams this week, what I'm thinking for the cadence is Sunday night is going to be the in between the college game, or not the college game, the afternoon game and the Sunday night game. I'm going to do the stream, but I'm going to try and do like a midday college football stream and talk about those games. Just to have something additionally out there. Thanks, Colin. Hopefully Colin, no, Sean's not going to come here. He's not going to be here. All right. Thanks, folks. We'll be back.